Good afternoon, my friends. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. I'm going to be leaving my email in the description so you can contact me about production lessons, spiritual guidance, tarot readings, astrology chart reading, what have you, anything you want, and we can set up an appointment and we can discuss further. Now, to get onto the subject at hand, today I'm going to be talking about a subject that's been pretty popular, I would say, in the last year or so. And it's been subject to a lot of clickbait videos on YouTube and just general misinformation that I thought I would clear up based off of my own personal experience and what you can expect from the subject. And this subject is the topic of the twin flame or the soulmate, right? So if you're generally familiar with this subject, you should know that a soulmate and a twin flame are completely different sort of things you can experience in life. And what I will say about that, in terms of if you don't know what that is that a soulmate is a person that you've had a connection with from a previous life. And when we're talking about previous lives, there are very different dynamics that could happen in terms of how you reincarnate basically in the present life that you're in. There's a lot of different factors coming into this. I don't necessarily believe that you are just one specific soul traveling from entity to entity. You are made up of multiple different souls, multiple different energies, just like your physical body is made up of multiple different cells and organisms, and you're not just one central entity. But it's the combination of all those entities that make you into the holistic person that you are today. Right? It's not really necessary it is necessary to focus on individual parts, but the individual parts are just parts of the whole picture, right? Your whole soul, so to speak, is the amalgamation, or I shouldn't say your whole soul, but your whole identity, rather, is the amalgamation of a bunch of different souls, and including the energies from, astrology in terms of creating your sort of personality as well as your genetic coding as well. So there's all kinds of different factors when we're talking about souls and spirits and whatnot, because there are different functionalities of those things, and they can represent themselves in a more physical construction, such as your DNA, which is your database information that you are gathering when you were born, and that's sort of your nature, and that's your inherent how should I say it? Your blueprint, rather, right? So that's a spiritual aspect, but then there's also the added spiritual qualities that could come from multiple different lifetimes, right? So there is a spirit in basically a lot of different, especially Eastern religions, that travel through person to person with each life, and they experience it that way. So this is sort of the spirit specifically that I'm talking about in terms of a microcosmic detail, in terms of discussing the soulmate and the twin flame phenomenon. So now that I've got that sort of covered, we can talk about the soulmate first, and then I'll go into the twin flame. And then I'll discuss the misconceptions about those two things and what you can sort of learn from them as you go forward. Now, the soulmate, for those of you who don't know, a soulmate is a person that has come from your previous life that you've had an experience or a relationship with, a strong connection with, that you are encountering again in this current lifetime. So, this is generally not necessarily a romantic situation, although it gets lumped into that category numerous times. It is just generally a person that you've had that connection with from a previous life, and then when you see them in real life, there will be a stir of weird emotions that you might feel towards that person. And this could come from pretty much anyone in your life that you might encounter, where you feel this weird connection to them, this weird karmic contract that you have to pay. That term is used a lot in the spiritual community, is a karmic contract, where you basically have unfinished business with this soul from a previous life that you might have to pay up in this life, or you've paid up that karma and you just encounter this person on the street in a simple encounter, and you're like, oh shit, this person feels like I know them for some reason, even though I've never met them before, and then you kind of go off into your own life and you never see them again. So there's a lot of different instances where that can happen. But personally, from my relationships, both romantically and within friendships, I find that sometimes when I engage with a soulmate, there is definitely something that needs to be paid off. And it's not usually something that's very easy to understand. It's usually an experience you need to have with this person that sort of balances out a previous relationship you had in your last life. So let's say you had a relationship with someone where you were dominant and controlling of that person in the previous life. And because of that, there is a tension between the soul where they want to seek retribution in this next life. So when you're in this life, they may play the dominant role towards you, and you may be experiencing the submissive role. And this is a very general outline of this kind of subject, but generally that kind of dynamic can play out, which I want to emphasize that these relationships you have aren't necessarily romantic. So I'm going to try to not utilize the romantic aspect, because there's millions of YouTube videos that are already covering the romantic aspects of the soulmate twin flame phenomenon. So I don't really want to talk too much about that, but that is definitely a very important aspect, because that's a romantic relationship is going to be the strongest in terms of your connection with another soul. So those kinds of contracts that you might have to pay out in this life from previous lives are usually going to be some kind of romantic encounter. However, just because the romantic encounter happened in a previous life, you might have to deal with this person in this life non-romantically, in a practical sense, whether that's through business or a friendship or even a rival. For instance, a rivalry can ensue based off of soulmates. Rivals, enemies, villains in your life are very much intertwined with the soulmate energy, as well as the twin flame energy, which I'll get into that in a bit. But with soulmates, it's very much you have a connection with this person from a previous life, and you're just encountering them in this life, and there is a sense that there is that bond that has already been made, right? That's why you're soulmates, because you have that connection with each other, that you are now engaging with them in this current lifetime. And this could be romantic, or it could just be a friendship, like I said. So it's important to keep that in mind, because I think that term is used around a lot, especially when, personally I found a romantic relationship that I believe to be a soulmate, and I'm fairly confident in that. Of course, the relationship didn't pan out in the end. We ended up breaking up, which was very disappointing, because I thought because we were soulmates, it was destined to be forever. This is the reality of the universe, is that there is no such thing as, at least in the transitory world, which is the three-dimensional world, there is no such thing as forever. Eternity and forever exist in the godly aspects of the world. And that's through infinity and nothingness and, that kind of thing, which is the whole point of every single religion, is to find your journey into that source of all life, which is what's truly eternal. Your romantic relationship with a person in the three-dimensional world will always end, no matter what. Even if you do find someone that you can be a partner with for your entire life, it's going to end when you die. And you will have to re-encounter that person in the next life, probably, although the relationship dynamic might be a bit different. Or you could re-encounter this person and the romantic relationship continues on into the next life. So, these kinds of things could happen. It's not an impossible feat to continually encounter someone in multiple lifetimes. In fact, that's very much a Buddhist idea. I'm not really familiar with the names per se, but I know the original Buddha, Siddhartha, who had his wife in his life as the Buddha. There was a notion that she would, be with him as his wife throughout every single lifetime. They would always meet up in every single lifetime and get married, and that would be their karmic bind, so to speak. That was their contract, that they would have a romantic relationship in every single lifetime. So there is that aspect as well. That could be a situation where you would have a soulmate in that regard. However, it's not really relevant to think that's always going to be the case. Things are always changing. Things are always developing. There's always new experiences to be had. So having the same soulmate connection with a person is very fine and dandy, but it's not really common, I would say, especially with the fact that most people's relationships don't really work out as they plan to. Now I'm going to get into the twin flame discussion, because this is the part that I think is very misinformed and very distorted in how it's presented on the internet and with other people. Now, I have been in a relationship, a romantic relationship, with what I believe to be a twin flame, and it didn't work out in the end. And I still carry some resentment for this relationship for personal reasons, which I won't get into, obviously. But I want to discuss the problem with the twin flame narrative that's being propagated, that it's sort of like you're destined to be together. This is the destiny of your romantic partnership, and you have to find your twin flame. The thing about the twin flame is that what it is, if you don't know what a twin flame is that in a previous life, your soul split apart into two different sections, and that splitting apart is your soul or self being amalgamated into two different lives, right? And for some reason, there is this notion by New Agers and spiritual people on YouTube that think that because you used to be one soul, it's all of a sudden like a prerequisite that you have to come together and form a romantic bond and become like a perfect amalgamation of a romantic relationship, which could happen. I'm not going to doubt that hasn't happened and people haven't done that. But I will say that if you think that finding your twin flame is going to be the best relationship and the best romantic partnership for you, you are very misinformed, because the twin flame, you have to think about that there is a reason you split off into two different people, and that's because you are destined to live two different lives, right? So most likely you aren't meant to come back together. There's a reason why you split off in the first place, is because, there's two different paths and two different lifestyles that I need to create and manifest in this experience of life, and you need to explore those. So there is a tendency that people think that because you used to be the same soul, you need to come back together. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you just need to drift apart and find your own path. And I realized this when delving into this twin flame relationship. And I realized that we were one person in a previous life that split apart after doing some guided meditation into past life experiences, which anyone can do, by the way. This isn't some crazy feat that you might think about. It's pretty practical once you get into the rudimentaries of it. But I will say that once I realized that we were of the same person, of the same lineage, spiritually, at first I thought this was supposed to be destined, because I bought into the narrative of the twin flame dynamic of being, we need to find each other and we need to make this work. Because the thing about the twin flames is that what you would read about is that both of you need to be sort of perfect, and you need to sort of fully attain your spiritual journey in order for your relationship to actually function. And I noticed this as well for both of us. If both of us weren't perfectly in line with our, spirituality or whatnot, then we would have arguments and we would yell at each other and constantly bicker and fight, basically, because both of us weren't really finished, essentially, in terms of attaining our spiritual path, basically. So that's the only way it will work. And even in that case, you don't need to be together. in that sense. You don't need to become unified because you are whole already. You don't need to have a second half to complete you, so to speak. That's the thing with the twin flame, is that you don't really need one in order to find happiness and success in this life. And that's what I realized when this relationship ended, was that there was a reason why we split apart, and there's a reason why we're not going to last together. So it ended, and that was it. And, I felt very bitter towards the end of it, because I felt like I was betrayed or manipulated in a certain way, which is kind of not really what I want to get into. But I'll emphasize that because, if you think you've found your twin flame or whatnot, keep in mind that it might not be, what is supposed to be. You might not end up being together. So it's important not to be attached to this individual. If one of you isn't perfect, then you don't need to be together, and that's perfectly fine. Which I think is a thing to think about when going into romances and romantic partnerships, is that you don't need to find your twin flame. You don't need to find your soulmate. You don't need to find this spiritual connection that you found at first sight, this love at first sight kind of bullshit. I think it's better to find or not necessarily better, but think about the value of finding new connections and new souls to connect with, new people to connect with on a deeper level, instead of thinking that you need to find someone from the past and reconnect with them, or find your perfect other half and reconnect with that entity. It's completely unnecessary in terms of having a full and happy lifestyle, right? I think it's much better to think about romance as an experience that, if whatever happens, happens, which is very difficult to grasp on, especially if you've become attached to the twin flame idea or ideology, or feeling that this needs to happen because you have that strong connection. And if you do meet your twin flame, which, guess what? Not everyone is going to have a twin flame. It doesn't happen to everyone. Right? So people who are thinking that they need to find their twin flame, or they're trying to attract it in their life, it might not even exist. So don't even get attached to that idea. And if it does happen, if it doesn't work out and there's weird rifts between you two, it's the time to realize that, okay, like, this isn't working. Like, go find someone else that's more geared towards you and what you need to accomplish in this life. And don't get attached to the idea and the ideology of the twin flame is perfect for whatever reason. It's not necessary. It's not healthy in any way whatsoever for your growth as a human being. And it took me a while to realize this, because I kept deluding myself, thinking that it had to happen. It was destiny. We needed to be together. And I was basically led along this path. And it made me very sick, physically, mentally, and just made me feel horrible, because I was so attached to this person and this idea that it needed to work, that I ended up really in places where I was really, really physically, like, in pain almost. Like, it was intense. And that's the thing with the twin flame relationship. If you get with this person, it's going to be intense, but if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, the pain you are going to feel from that is going to be equally as intense, and it's going to be very, very bad, basically, for lack of a better word. So keep that in mind if you're trying to find your twin flame and think that it needs to be perfect, and you think that it needs to be this destined call, that you're going to find this perfect person and you guys are going to create beautiful things and you're going to have a beautiful relationship. It's a fantasy world that you're getting into, and it might happen. I'm not going to deny that the twin flame dynamic won't happen, but don't get attached to it, because keep in mind, there is a reason you separated, and it's usually a karmic thing, some kind of weird past life problem that sort of divided your mind into two different sort of sides of thinking, and then when you reincarnated, you had to, like, devolve into two different paths, and you live your lives in that way. And you don't necessarily need to come back together. It's not really relevant. Souls and spirits are all going in every single direction and needing to find your, soulmate or your twin flame is irrelevant. Find new connections. I encourage people to find new connections with new people that you don't need to have this karmic baggage with, and start creating new experiences in this life instead of hanging on to old shit from the past. It's really not necessary. So I'm going to leave it at that. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. And hit me up on my email. I'd definitely like to hear from some of you. And I will see you next time. Peace.